RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
Hello cave dwellers, welcome to the cave, to the Dragon's Den in fact, as we continue our journey of discovery with the Dragon32, the only computer ever to come out of the country of Wales. We've got our own machine here which is broken, and in part 1 we discovered we've got power problems with it. So as we continue to tell the story about the Dragon32, we're going to try and fix this up and see if we can get it in a working state to demonstrate to you just what it can do. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll dive straight in, and we'll also ask the question, as we discovered in part 1, that this is a very similar computer in design to the Tandy colour computer. And I want to find out, is that more than just a passing resemblance? Is the Dragon32 in fact a clone? Well, let's take it to the lab, let's find out, and let's continue learning all about the Dragon32.
Here we are then where we left off on episode 1 with our power board, and what we found the problem was is that we have our 12 and 5 volts present, but our negative 5 volts is missing. That just shows up as a big fat 0. 12, 5 and negative 5 volts are what the main system board expects, and I'm not prepared to plug it in until we've got that. Following the nice thick traces on the back of the board, it's easy to find the components responsible for our negative 5 volt output, and some stand out as being a common point of failure, for example the 7905 voltage regulator and a single electrolytic capacitor. So these are my first target to swap out, and we'll see if that solves our problem. I'd also like to replace all of the electrolytic capacitors on both the power and the system board as a preventative maintenance measure, as well as the other voltage regulator, in the hope of giving our Dragon a little more longevity through which we can enjoy it. Let's start with that voltage regulator then. We'll get that removed, which isn't too tricky a task, and we'll solder a new one in. I'm using leaded solder, which is in keeping with a system of this age, and nice chunky solder joints, as per the existing joints. Both my desoldering gun and my iron are set to 350 degrees Celsius, and that seems to work just fine. That's the old regulator out, and our new one is now fitted. So let's go back and check the voltages and see if we've got the correct negative 5 volts now showing up. Well, this is different. Not only do we not have our negative 5 volts, but we've also lost our 12 volts. That's now given us a 0 reading, and that makes very little sense to me as it's got no dependence on the regulator we've just replaced. So something quite odd is going on here. Let's just ignore that for a minute and we'll continue with our negative 5 volts problem. Checking the new regulator with the multimeter, we can see that it's receiving no input, and of course we've established that there's no output from it. So we continue our journey tracing the track from the regulator, and it now travels to this resistor R5 and then onto capacitor C5, which is next on my hit list. So let's get that capacitor swapped out and we'll see if we're in a better position. Okay, that's our new capacitor in place, and where do we stand now? Well, there's some good news. We now have a negative voltage reading. Now this isn't ideal, it's way past -6 volts, so that isn't quite right. And the confusion continues. On testing this time, we've got 5 volts where our 12 volts should be, 5 volts present where it should be, and -6 volts is present and incorrect. The regulator responsible for this is not receiving enough voltage to enable it to give us 12 volts. But we've changed nothing that would affect that. So while I decide how to tackle this, I decided to press on with recapping the board and replacing the second regulator as part of that preventative maintenance. And who knows, perhaps we'll find one of those parts brings our 12 volts back to life. It's a little haphazard, but if it doesn't work, at least it eliminates those parts from the equation. But then we had something of a breakthrough. The power enters our board via a right-angled 9-pin connector, and if I give it a twist, our 12 volts actually springs to life. This is quite a common place to find bad joints because of the stress placed on them from plugging and unplugging the power cable. On closer inspection though, it's not just the case of reflowing the joints to fix this. I gave that a try and we had no joy. Notice how the outer 2 legs are shorter than the others. This is by design on this particular connector, and if we ensure enough solder flows down into the hole, then yes, contact is indeed made and it works, but it feels cheap. Compare it with this connector on which all the legs are long enough to actually go through the hole, which is far preferable. So let's solder this connector in instead, and as I fit it, you can see all the legs are now proud and fully through the holes, and that should give us a much better connection. And on testing now, we actually have a good result. Our 12 volts is back, our 5 volts is present, and our -5 volts is now bang on a solid -5. The belly of the Dragon has fire in it once again, and even if we give that new connector a good wiggle, the output is still solid and we don't lose our 12 volts like before. So throughout all of that, we've fixed and refurbished our power board, and now I'm happy to plug that into our system board with my fingers crossed to see if any damage was caused to the system board itself as a result of these power problems before we got hold of the machine. Let's put it all back together and see what happens.
This is the moment of truth then. We're using the composite out to give us the best possible picture, if indeed we have a picture. The power cable goes into that new power socket. Fingers crossed. Let's press the on button. And it works. We've got that lovely green screen with 1982 by Microsoft there. I hadn't quite realised just how green that green text is. It really is green on green. But that's incredibly satisfying. I'm really surprised actually that this works, because I was convinced that the power problems would have created further problems deeper in the machine, especially with the RAM. And it's an important lesson to learn, really. Always test your power supplies and as much power testing as you can before it reaches the system board. My guess would be that this has been in storage. I need to confirm this with the previous owner. I'd guess it's been in storage for a long time. If it's been in storage in somewhere like a loft where there's a lot of temperature changes, that creates a lot of expansion and contraction, especially on things like the port where we found a problem with the power connector. So it may well be that the problems happened while it was in storage. It may have gone into storage in a perfectly working state, and then the capacitors degraded, the expansion and contraction has caused problems with the port, And I'll confirm this, but it may well be that the previous owner hasn't actually tested it before sending it here, because I think if they did test it, something would have got zapped, and we've been extremely fortunate today. And our keyboards are working too. Those keys are incredibly satisfying to press. There's an interesting thing with the Dragon actually. If you press two keys on the same line too quickly, so for example 3 and 4 are working fine there, but because of the way it scans the keyboard, if I press them too quickly, we're only getting a 3, and that's incredibly frustrating if you're a touch typist. Well, I'm incredibly pleased that's working. Pleased and surprised, but it's working, and that's great. There's more work to be done. We need to recap the system board, we need to clean it up, and we need to give it some longer term testing. But before we come on to that, there's a question that's always hung over the Dragon32, and it's this. Is this machine simply a Tandy colour computer clone, or does it stand out as a computer in its own right? I think we should discover more and find out if we can answer that question now.
It's a question that's always hung over the Dragon. The Dragon32 is built to the same Motorola reference design as the Tandy colour computer. That's the 6809 CPU, the MC6883 synchronous address multiplexer, the MC6847 video display generator, and the MC6821 peripheral interface adapter. Between these 4 chips, with the addition of some RAM, you essentially have a complete computer. It's comparable in its code execution speed to that of a Z80A CPU, running at 4 MHz, and its rival, the ZX Spectrum, was running such a Z80 at 3.5 MHz for comparison. The Dragon is about 95% the same as the Tandy colour computer, which was released 2 years earlier in 1980, and that was built around the same Motorola reference design. So naturally, a computer based around exactly the same core chips is going to operate in a very similar fashion. There are some key differences though. For example, the Tandy was built for the 525-line display of NTSC TV sets, and the signal output from the video display generator needed no alteration to support this. On the Dragon, extra circuitry was required to convert it to the PAL signal used in its home markets, and as a result, pseudo-color generation effects used by American programmers didn't work on the Dragon. This gave the colour computer, or Coco as it was nicknamed, an advantage when it came to reproducing arcade games, but compared to the likes of the Commodore 64, video capabilities for both the Dragon and the Coco were seriously lacking. The Dragon did come with 32K as standard though. That's greater than the stock 4 or 16K of the Coco in 1982, although later revisions would rectify this. Finally, there are some differences in the way the internal routines are stored in the ROM. For example, the keyboard scan routine is different, and the full 16K Microsoft Extended Color Basic Interpreter was included on the Dragon, but that was an option on the Tandy's original release. George Saint, writing in Dragon User magazine, no, I'm not making this up, George Saint, points out these differences as evidence that calling the Dragon a clone is a myth, and it's a case of same chips but different cup of cocoa, pointing out that it's the 5% that makes all the difference.
So armed with that information, do we think the Dragon32 was a clone? Well, the Tandy was released 2 years earlier in 1980. It was built on a low-cost platform and it was proving to be very popular. Given that, it should come as no surprise that Dragon Data wanted to emulate that success. In their defense, they were using a reference design supplied by and supported by Motorola. This reference was to encourage microcomputer creators to use their chips, and it allowed Dragon Data to rapidly create a micro when they didn't already have a design, and the UK computer market was perhaps starting to get away from them before they could even get on board. This reference design, however, was born out of a project called Project Green Thumb. This was a joint venture between Motorola and Tandy, and it goes back to 1977 and resulted in the Radio Shack TRS-80 color computer, which would go on to be renamed the Tandy color computer. So given the way that that reference design was birthed, the joint project between Tandy and Motorola, I think it's fair to conclude that yes, the Dragon32 is in fact a clone. And if any more proof were needed, I'm told that you can swap out the ROM on a Tandy color computer and just rewire the keyboard slightly, and you have a complete Dragon32 conversion. That's my opinion. Yours may differ. If it does, leave a comment below and let me know why. Now, let's get back to finishing off recapping the system board on our Dragon32 so we can finally get down to enjoying the computer.
Recapping the Dragon's main board was a fairly quick task relative to some of the more recent recapping we've done in the cave. There are just 6 electrolytic caps to change, and the vacuum desoldering gun makes short work of that, but I think even with a manual solder sucker that wouldn't take you too long if you're undertaking this task yourself. The wrinkled underside of the PCB, that's perfectly normal. This is tin layered across the copper at the time of production, and the solder mask is on top. And you'll see that on other micros too, like the Spectrum. Unsurprisingly, this was the cheap option when it came to manufacturing at the time, and it stood the test of time just fine, despite looking a little funky. My tools are still set at 350 degrees Celsius, and I'm using a little flux paste to get the old solder flowing, but on the whole, it's an easy board to work with, and the caps put up little to no fight in being removed. Finally, I gave the board a clean down with some isopropyl alcohol and an anti-static brush, returned it to the case, and we're ready for one last test before wrapping up work for today. Does it still work with the new capacitors? Of course it does. Happily working away there with a full complement of new capacitors on both the system board and the power board. And that's all we're going to do on the inside of this Dragon32. We're just going to leave it there, and we're going to concentrate on cleaning it up to make it look like new on the outside, including a new sticker, but I don't think there's too much work required there. And that gives us plenty of time in part 3 to discuss what happened next with the Dragon32. What upgrades were available, what peripherals, and ultimately, how was the dragon slain? What became of it? There's lots to cover. I hope you'll join me in part 3, and between now and then, I will be live streaming with this to build up my knowledge of what the machine can do and to capture some footage of it in action for that part 3. I hope you'll join me either on the live stream or in part 3. Until then, thank you for watching and take care. If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.